It was a stormy Friday night, the kind where the rain just doesn't stop. I was slogging through my shift as a pizza delivery guy, and after 3 solid hours on the road, my stomach was in knots. I desperately needed a bathroom break, but with orders pouring in and my boss cracking the whip, that was out of the question. When I finally grabbed the next order, the address took me to a desolate part of town. The streetlights were sparse, and the darkness seemed almost alive. My thoughts were tangled up in finding a bathroom as I drove through the rain, which pounded on my windshield like a relentless drum. Arriving at the house, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The place looked dark and ominous, with only a single flickering light illuminating the front porch. I parked and stepped out, clutching a pizza box like it was my lifeline. As I made my way up the driveway, something caught my eye. Movement in the bushes. My heart raced. Was it just the wind? Or was someone or something lurking there? I rang the doorbell, trying to ignore the creeping dread. The door creaked open, revealing a woman in her 30s, who looked as if she had seen a ghost. She seemed taken aback by the early delivery. "Hi, your pizza's here," I said, though my nerves were on edge. "That'll be $15. Her eyes darted past me, and her face turned a sickly shade of white. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice faltering. Her whisper was barely audible. "That's him. That's my ex. He's been stalking me for weeks." My stomach dropped. This was no ordinary delivery. "Do you have a phone? We need to call the police." She nodded, panic-stricken, and dashed back inside, leaving the door ajar. I stood there, exposed and vulnerable, every instinct screaming at me to stay alert. Moments later, she returned with her phone, trembling as she handed it to me. I quickly explained the situation to the dispatcher, keeping a wary eye on the bushes where the shadows danced menacingly. As we waited, the rain continued its relentless assault, punctuated by the occasional rustle from the bushes. Finally, the distinct sound of sirens pierced through the storm. Flashing police lights appeared, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. 2 officers emerged, one directing his flashlight towards us, while the other cautiously approached the bushes. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his voice steady but alert. I recounted the night's events, pointing towards the bushes where he had seen the unsettling movement. The officer signaled his partner, and together they advanced on the undergrowth. What felt like an eternity later, they dragged the struggling, yelling man from the bushes. It was clear he was the woman's ex-boyfriend. Relief washed over her as she sobbed. Thanking the officers profusely, they assured her he would be taken into custody and that she'd be safe for now. The police car with its captive drove off into the night. Turning back to me, the woman's eyes were filled with tears. "Thank you so much. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." I managed a weak smile, still reeling from the adrenaline. "I'm just glad you're okay. But, could I use your bathroom real quick?" She laughed, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Of course, come in." As I washed my hands, I reflected on how close we had come to disaster. I was just a pizza delivery guy, but tonight I had made a real difference. The darkness outside seemed a bit more menacing now, but I also felt a newfound strength. I had faced through danger and survived. When I returned to the pizza place, my boss eyed me curiously. "What took you so long?" he asked. "Crazy night," I shrugged, not ready to dive into the full story. As I headed out for the next delivery, a heightened sense of vigilance stayed with me. The dark streets and hidden corners held a new significance. I knew better now. Sometimes danger lurks in the shadows, and it's always best to stay alert, because you never know what might be hiding in the dark, and it's far better to be safe than sorry. I work as a delivery driver, and my shift starts at 10 p.m. A tough job, especially when the clock ticks past midnight. It is a demanding gig, but the pay is decent. On one particularly Friday night, the city was clogged in darkness and rain, adding an extra layer of eerie silence to the quiet streets I navigate. Around midnight, I received an order that took me to an unfamiliar part of town. The address seemed odd, and it took me a while to track it down. When I finally arrived, I found myself at the end of a long, unlit road. The house at the end looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Broken windows, peeling paint, and an oppressive air of neglect. A chill crawled up my spine, but I had a job to do. I parked my aging car and grabbed the food bag, trying to shake off the creeping unease. The silence was unnerving, No rustling leaves, no distant hum of traffic, just an unsettling stillness. I approached the front door and knocked, but it creaked open on its own. Hesitant, I stepped inside and the door slammed shut behind me. The house was pitch black, except for a few flickering candles that barely illuminated the hallway. The air was damp and frigid. As I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoed ominously. At the end, the door stood slightly ajar. "Bring it here," a voice called out, its tone so soft it was almost a whisper. I pushed open the door and entered the room. It was enveloped in darkness, save for a single candle casting sinister shadows on the walls. As my eyes adjusted, I felt a presence in the room with me. I could just make out a figure in the shadows, tall and gaunt with unnervingly long fingers. The figure stood into the candlelight, and I gasped. It was a woman, but her skin was unnatural pallid gray, and her eyes were deep, hollow pits. Her smile revealed sharp yellow teeth. "Thank you for bringing the food," she said, her voice now a raspy whisper that sent a jolt of fear through me. "Stay a while, won't you?" I took a step back, panic rising. I needed to go. "I have more deliveries," I stammered. She moved closer, her eyes never leaving mine. "No, stay. We rarely have visitors. It gets so lonely here." Desperation set in as I glanced around for an escape route. My phone was in my pocket, and a plan formed in my mind. I pulled it out, pretending to check for messages. "I have to go. My boss is calling," I lied, trying to sound as convincing as possible. The woman's head tilted slightly as she studied me, and for a moment, I feared she won't let me leave. Then, she stepped back, her eerie smile returning. "Very well. But you'll come back, won't you?" she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I then said, "Sure," but I didn't mean it at all. I said, "I'll be back." Then after that, I turned and walked briskly towards the door, my heart pounding. As I reached the hallway, her laughter echoed behind me, a cold and malevolent sound that made my skin crawl. I bolted out of the house and didn't stop until I reached my car. I jumped in, hands trembling, and sped away from that nightmarish place. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the doorway, her hollow eyes watching me as I disappeared down the dark road. Once I reached the main street, I pulled over trying to calm my racing heart. What had just happened? Who was that woman? The rest of my shift was a blur as my mind kept drifting back to the old house and the sinister woman inside. When I finally got home, exhausted and shaken, I collapsed into bed. The next day, I told myself about the nightmarish encounter. They laughed it off, saying I must have been imagining things. Maybe they were right. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I know what I had seen was real. To this day, I have never returned to that part of town, nor do I ever plan to. My name is Jason, and I'm 15 years old. Last month, while my parents and younger sister were away on a trip to Texas, I was left home alone. At first, I was thrilled by the freedom, endless movie marathons, and junk food galore. But one rainy night, everything changed, and the excitement turned into a nightmare. It was a stormy Friday evening. The rain hammered relentlessly against the windows as I spent most of the day gaming and texting friends, and by exactly 11 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I climbed under the covers and turned off the lights, and I tried to sleep, lulled by the rhythmic patter of rain. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a noise downstairs, muffled voices. My first thought was that my parents had returned early, but I quickly remembered they wouldn't be back until Monday. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The voice was faint, barely audible, but my curiosity got the best of me. I crept out of bed, moving cautiously towards my bedroom door. Peeking out into the dark hallway, I saw nothing but shadows. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint murmur from downstairs. Despite the gnawing fear in my stomach, I decided to investigate. I tiptoed down the stairs, each step a silent drumbeat of terror. When I reached the bottom, I paused to listen again. The voice was clearer now, but the words were still indistinct. It seemed to be coming from the living room. My heart raced as I took a deep breath and glanced towards the sound. Suddenly a loud bang echoed through the house, a door slamming shut. My blood turned to ice. I whipped around the corner and froze in horror. At the end of the hallway stood a shadowy figure, tall and cloaked in darkness. His features were obscure, but his presence was menacing, panic surged through me. Who was this person? And how did he get into my house? My first instinct was to flee. I dashed up the stairs, my heart pounding as I heard footsteps pounding behind me. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it, fumbling with my phone as I dialed 911. My hands were shaking as I explained the situation to the operator, my voice quivering with fear. She assured me that the police were on their way and instructed me to stay on the line. As I clutched the phone, I could hear the intruder moving around downstairs, my mind racing with dread about what he might be doing. I felt like an eternity before I finally heard a distant wail of sirens. The noises downstairs abruptly ceased, and an oppressive silence fell over the house. A few minutes later, there was a loud knock at the front door followed by voices. Thankfully, the police had arrived. I cautiously opened my bedroom door and made my way downstairs. 2 officers were in the hallway, their flashlights cutting through the dark. I recounted everything that had happened, my voice still trembling though. The officers conducted a thorough search of the house, but found no trace of the intruder. The front door was unlocked, but there was no sign of forced entry. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. They took my statement and reassured me that they would patrol the area throughout the whole night. They advised me to stay with a neighbor or relative until my parents returned, but I refused to leave my home. They left me their contact information and promised to keep a close watch. After the police departed, I tried to calm my racing heart, but the fear lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow figure and his intentions. Why had he been in my house? What was he searching for? The questions haunted me as I lay awake, every creak and groan of the house amplifying my terror. When morning finally came, I felt a little better but remained shaken. I called my parents and told them what had happened. They were shocked and promised to cut their trip short and return home immediately. The following days were a blur. My parents arrived, and we had a new security system installed. The police continued their investigation, but they never found any leads. To this day, I don't know who that intruder was or what he wanted, but I'll never forget that night. The night I came face to face with the unknown and the terror that came with it.